never did.
Reflect quickly on Glass-Steagall before you go on.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we all know what Glass-Steagall did, I think, is to separate mom-and-pop banks, mortgage banks, from financial gambler banks.
Investment banks.
That create like the derivatives and other financial instruments by which they create vast wealth.
And that was put in by FDR and his.
And it was eliminated by Bill Clinton.
Right.
Yeah, well, Bill Clinton, under pressure from the Rubinite economists, Robert Rubin's crowd, which surprised President Obama, hired most of them for his administration and continued that process. But I think Bernie and Elizabeth Warren both recognize that we must do something to rein in financial parasitism.
You got Wall Street, you got banking, you've got the pharmaceutical industries.
Don't separate the two.
I mean, the thing.
Actually, that's what Glass-Steagall was supposed to do: is separate the two.
You've got multiple Goliaths, okay, and now we have Bernie Sanders,
Little
right?
David.
Little David, all right, going up against these multiple Goliaths. I mean. Tell me what is my vote going to count? I mean, he's going to really do anything. Is he going to be as castrated as Obama was?
I disagree.
They got apoplectic over Dodd-Frank.
Both
which is not
parties
classy.
are controlled by the party hierarchy and big money. And I don't care whether it's the Democrats or Republicans, they both have a script pretty much that they're following. Now, Bernie may be able to break that mold because he is garnering tremendous public support for voicing reform of issues besides banking, financial, healthcare, that benefit the little guy and gal, the middle class, soon to be extinct if things aren't changed. And that's when he gets 10,000 people, 20,000 people to come to a rally. There's the people that have done their homework and are listening to the issues, his issues, which are not, labeled one capitalist, socialist. They're for the people. And it goes back to what I consider Democratic Party roots, which I believe have been subverted over the years by big money and corporate power, that gave us maybe NAFTA and the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the TTIP and the other so-called free trade agreements, to get back to the little guy and gal, the middle class. When you, and I believe it, when you, rather than a trickle-down economic theory that when the rich are richer, the middle class and poor somehow gain something. When a rising tide lifts all boats, and that's true. When more people have more money, whether it's from decreased taxation or increased wages, they spend that.
The economy percolates.
The economy percolates.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that Bernie wants to do, and there has been talk, Obama did kind of talk about it, and so did Hillary, but not to the same extent. When we were talking before about disruptive economy, which is what we're in right now, just like 70 or 80 years ago. What got us really out of that was after World War II, the GI Bill gave everybody the opportunity to get an education, college education, become engineers, and get all the kinds of jobs that paid well, not jobs which were, working on the assembly line where you can only make, $2 or $3 an hour. All of a sudden, now you can be the engineer designing those assembly lines.
Wait a minute, Marty. Free education on the college level.
Yeah.
Is this on the level?
Boy, there's a socialist idea.
I know, but I think a lot of people are going to look forward to something like that. It's pretty expensive to get your kids through college these days, is it not?
He's saying public schools, state schools, local community colleges. He said there should be no little or no tuition for that. That is going to be a middle class game changer when that happens. Because I was going to bring that up about the success of the two of the most successful government programs in American history were Social Security and the GI Bill after World War II. It created a middle class. These people, and then there was also very active labor unions then. Which
How
really
did Social Security create a middle class? I don't quite understand that.
Because elderly people didn't have to live in poverty.
Well, we don't think about the elderly people as the middle class.
No, but their children had to support
they came
them.
from the children had to support them. You had to have mom and pop at home,
Yeah,
which is happening
it's
again.
like, I don't know. It seems that you're wagging, they're using the
Social
tail to wag
Security
the
is-
dog. A question arises: where did this middle class come from?
Am I
That
hearing
has
about it?
had huge wealth, and I think that really came from corporate America, from free enterprise. Now, free enterprise
existed
is
before
not free enterprise. Let me finish. Bill.
Okay.
Free enterprise, it seems, is now failing the middle class, and I don't think it's because these people up, in the high levels of the corporations are saying, "Let's screw the middle class." What's happening, it seems, is that the technology for production is changing radically, very radically, and as a result, all of these middle class jobs now are going out the window.
In Mexico
They're
and
being
China.
lost. And on top of that, there was globalization, of course, that shipped a lot of jobs overseas. So it seems to me that punishing the capitalists isn't where it's at. There's a fundamental change required in terms of how we produce, how the people are rewarded, and so on.
Current capitalism has destroyed the middle class by accumulating vast wealth, and yes, they've
How does
said,
it destroy
let's screw the middle class, let's screw the average guy."
Accumulating
Yeah.
wealth doesn't destroy the middle
Well,
class.
that's why they've offshored jobs.
Cheaper labor
They've
market.
sent their American manufacturing base overseas.
Well, I agree
to
with you
evade
about the
taxes.
offshoring of jobs, but accumulating capital, if anything, can help the middle class. Because a guy becomes, or a woman becomes middle class because capital buys tools that make them more productive.
So you're saying
instead
trickle-down
of
economics
somebody
works.
taking a little screwdriver to put a screw in,
Just so happens, Miles,
capital
that it's
can
not
be
coming
used to
down.
buy a robot. And that person that put the screw in and got very little money now can program the robot, can make the robot, can design the robot. And those are higher level jobs. Those
that comes
are
from
middle
education.
class jobs.
What about jobs like teachers and writers and artists?
What about it?
That's not the same as someone who puts a screw in. I mean, you can't have a robot teacher or robot artist or...
That's where we're headed.
Yes, that's absolutely true. There's no doubt. But I think that we're talking here about, generally speaking, people who worked in factories, people who were machinists and got very, very good salaries and were the middle class, and people who sat at their desks and moved the goods of production from here to there to make it all happen. People who sold things. And those were wonderful middle class jobs.
Yeah,
and
but most
now,
of those
when
factories
people
are
want to buy something, they go to their computer and they click a little bit with the mouse and they buy the thing. And they're obviating all of those middle class jobs that were involved in merchandising and sales and all
But
of
again,
that
what
stuff.
about the carriage makers? What about the people who made battleships? Gee, the people that made battleships are not building battleships anymore because battleships became obsolete 75 years ago.
Well, that's right.
That
but
concept-
the means of production switched. It went from, in the old days, you built a ship, for example. It's a good example. You built a ship by welding plates of steel together, all right? Well, now robots can do a lot of that, right? Robots do an awful lot of what was done by hand. You look at an automobile factory today that's full of robots.
That concept of beneficial capitalism, if it ever really existed, is extinct now. And one example of that is when big corporations used to employ a lot of people, they employed them for life. They got benefits, they got pension corporations, those are extinct now. The corporate heads, the boards, and the CEOs are now have taken back any of those guarantees for workers and put them out of a job. Now you have people who are just barely scraping by, and they're not allowed to work enough hours to get benefits.
Let's say the technology, all right, somehow or other outstrips the need for human labor. Is there any provision that has Bernie said anything about it? An annual wage? Has that ever been part of his platform?
I don't know.
I mean,
I don't know. But to your point, just because if somebody made a widget that becomes obsolete and he doesn't have that middle class salary anymore from his union job making widgets down at the widget plant, doesn't mean that he's out of the middle class forever. He needs to be he or she, because the workforce is both genders now, has to be retrained, and there has to be, now that's where government can get smart.
Does Bernie have any ideas along those lines? Retraining people.
Subsidizing the education in the community colleges and
As
the
you
public
said
colleges.
before.
There it is.
This seems to be one issue, all right?
I think it's a key one.
This
It's a
is a
big one.
key issue that maybe needs to be promoted. Maybe
Now,
people
here's
should know
something
that.
Bernie says, and it may be worth debating a little bit. He feels that the middle class is being hollowed out, and he feels that what we need is jobs. And he says we should allocate $1 trillion over 5 years to modernize the roads and fix the bridges and all of that.
Infrastructure.
Yeah, they've been talking about infrastructure now for 10 years,
No, but
and nobody's done anything
No,
about
because
it.
the money's been used for other things.
Right.
Wars that were put on a credit card, right? Back to the healthcare thing. The one big difference, and my Canadian friend, brought this up to me. He said that Canadians, the Yanks view healthcare as something of a luxury. Not part of the infrastructure. He said in Canada, and probably if you looked at England and Germany and the Scandinavian countries, they look at medical care and health care the same way. It's part of the infrastructure. If that works well, the rest of the economy works well, because you have a healthier workforce, you have people who can spend the first couple of months home with a baby where they don't have to go back to work in 2 or 3 weeks and leave their kid to childcare, or the factory where they work, like the auto plants in Europe, they have daycare centers in the auto plants. I saw a thing about the Volkswagen plant in Germany, in Wolfsburg, where people bring their kids to work with them, and they have a trained staff who takes care of the kids during the day while somebody's working on the assembly line.
And to get back to your point, Joe, about a living wage, the European nations, many of them, including Holland, are looking at the concept of a living wage for all citizens of a certain amount that would be put back into the economy. You wouldn't have to provide a lot of money taking care of homeless people, or it builds society, it builds community, rather than a duplicate class of people, the rich and the poor. You're somehow, and there's always been rich and poor. There always will be rich and poor. There just doesn't have to be such a disparity between the rich and the poor, and that's what they're driving at with a living wage.
Yeah, one of the misnomers and we use it here a lot too, but in America, there's never been a middle class. Middle class is a term, it's a European term. Basically, we have middle income people here. Middle classes go back to the age of the aristocracy, the peasant, and the middle class. And guess who the middle class, by the way, were? It's the people who own the corporations.
Right.
Those were the middle class.
And the guilds, right.
That was what your middle class was. Here it's middle income. We can travel between all three. You have some people out there, I don't know how many, but there are people out there whose great-grandfathers were millionaires, and they're paupers. Basically, they just traveled from one group to another group. And we have people whose grandfathers were paupers, came to this country, the old expression, he came to this country, he had 2 nickels in his pocket, and his son was a millionaire. That's one of the great things about America, is the quote, American dream, American promise, is that whatever you come to this country as, whether you're born here or you immigrate here, you have the potential to be anything. You could be pauper, you can be a millionaire.
And education is the basis of that.
And that's the key.
And when Bernie, as John says, is pushing education up until 2 years of college, that benefits everybody. And it bypasses the burden of property taxes, which is a regressive tax. Here in New York, our education system is designed that some districts, rich in property, their kids get more. Other districts, upstate and in poorer cities, they don't have the same base of property taxes, and their kids don't get as full and complete an education as rich districts. That's an inequality that has to be
We're the only
changed.
country in the world that funds education that way.
Well,
no, seriously, we are.
In prior to 1972, in New York State, just to change that a little bit, we had 14 income tax brackets in New York, from 2% to 15%. And in 72, under Nelson Rockefeller, the bottom 2 brackets were eliminated and the top 9 brackets were eliminated. An enormous gift to the very wealthy.
His friends.
Right. And that basically gave a income
Well, he
tax.
was John Dee's son. So.
An income tax of 6.85% whether you made $30,000 or $30 million. And that cost New York State over $8 billion a year ever since 1972, which, in my opinion, was the genesis of the rise of obscene property taxes that forced so many people of modest means out of their homes, lost farmland, and that led to the inequality in education between rich and poor districts. And that needs to change. We have to get, people say, well, we have to increase tax. We can't increase taxes on the wealthy. We're not increasing taxes. We're restoring fair taxation. And that gets back to when Bernie wants to do something for education for all our kids.
City University used to be free.
Yeah. Well,
City
that's what we're
University of
talking
New York
about,
used to
is
be a free
returning to a
university.
system like that. And some of the best teachers and lawyers and medical professionals, came out of that system.
Yeah.
Who benefits from education? Everybody.
It's
All
infrastructure.
society.
It's infrastructure, just like healthcare is infrastructure. You can't drive across a bridge that's crumbling. Likewise, you can't have a workforce that isn't falling down dead. Sorry.
All of these issues are the issues that Bernie is focusing on. Home issues. He has not made a lot of comments about foreign policy, but to build a coalition, to build a strong base, to get elected, to get a nomination, to get elected, you have to focus on what provides for the most people, our society, a commonality, and the commons. Let's focus on the common good rather than common greed, as has been and is an accelerating modality.
I just want to touch upon what might be a part of his foreign policy. Apparently, it seems to me that there's a segment of this country that have a liking to the Russian fellow Putin. They actually find some heroic quality in Putin. And I think that that same segment is also attracted to one of the Republican candidates, Donald Trump. What is the foreign policy that we can project that would be manifested in someone like Bernie Sanders?
I don't think we know enough yet. I think he's still, I think that iron is still on the anvil. He's still
focused on
the domestic
politics.
stuff. He's focusing so much on the domestic. I've been looking for it myself. Okay, part of me is disappointed that he hasn't made a statement yet. But look where we are in the cycle. I mean, we are way out in the election cycle at this point. But where was I going with that? Anyway,
Bernie has made foreign policy comments, mostly as in his role as a senator from Vermont, but not as candidate currently.
Well, the Iran deal. He's very outspoken about
very
the Iran
much
deal.
for the Iran deal and diplomacy rather than warmongering and more profiteering and more destruction. And it takes, I read, there was scholars who just released a statement saying, please, can we just try some diplomacy? There was a letter from over 340 rabbis from all different denominations of Judaism and branches of Judaism that said they support the Iran deal for all the good reasons. So I think Bernie has a handle on foreign policy, but any candidate who goes everywhere with his policy statements is going to make too many enemies. And I think you must hold something in reserve. Fox News wants Bernie to attack Hillary Clinton, and he refuses to do that because that's a fool's errand. You don't get anywhere by fighting with someone and or being a race baiter like the bad hair guy.
And yet, what's worth looking up is his appearances on Fox. Yeah, I've looked at half a dozen interviews that Bernie's done on Fox over the last year or two. He comes out smelling really good. And the Fox people, they try to corner him, they try to bait him, he
let's be fair here. They actually do like him because they want that's right. They want to jab it to him.
I get that.
Bernie's a very, very smart cookie, and he's got a lot of experience.
But he doesn't fall for the attack.
Well, the plus side,
right,
he's
and
on
that's the
Fox,
sign.
he's getting exposure. So that's a plus side, as long as he can handle it.
Look, he's not getting the exposure that he should get as one of the primary candidates in this election cycle with the MSM. They're not focusing on him. Jill Stein of the Greens is getting bupkis. It's all we hear on the news is Donald Trump offended these people. He committed this faux pas, this atrocity. Hillary is still trying to hide her position on this or that, or won't commit to this or that. Bernie,
waiting to see where the tide goes.
Bernie is the real deal, and he is trying to build a coalition of people who see that there's more to benefit society than vulture capitalism, obscene costing health care that didn't go nearly far enough with the so-called Affordable Care Act and its giveaways to big pharma and for-profit. Why do you think all the corporations are getting into buying hospitals now? Because it's very profitable thanks to the ACA and the insurance industry.
It's good for the 401ks.
Well,
but I'm curious to see, though, and it's unfortunate that we have to wait till October, but to see what happens when we have the first debate. Because that's really when you're going to see him on stage, right with Hillary and with the other candidates.
Do yourself a favor. Look up. Go back to C-SPAN's archives and look at Bernie's speeches on the floor of the Senate. I think you kind of see where he's going to come down on a debate and his style for coming down on a debate. He's really a good debater,
and he doesn't take any crap.
And one thing that I want to mention before I've got a dog in the fight with the treatment of veterans. I'm a Vietnam vet. I've been well treated in the VA system. I've been poorly treated in the VA system. It's been all over the map. But when Bernie got together with John McCain a couple of years ago. That John McCain, and crafted a veterans benefit that is the best in the last 50 years. That he won my vote right there with that, because this is a guy who, he might be a dove, but you know what? He's going to take care of veterans. And
Doves tend to be very respectful and generous to veterans, whereas the people who tend to like to start wars tend to like to forget the veterans after the war is
chicken
over.
hawks, I
It's been
call them.
a national
Chicken hawks.
obscenity is the treatment of our vets since World War II and the Korean War. But Bernie really is not a dove. He has voiced support for things that I might not agree with. In the Ukraine. We made
the other guys.
We made a deal with the Soviet Union that we weren't going to surround them with NATO stooges and pressure them. We broke that deal, and with our support for the Ukraine, and look where that's gotten, not us, but the people who live in eastern
And the Ukraine is run by a dictator much worse than Putin at this point.
Yeah, well, there's also been, I believe he's voiced support for the Saudi bombing of Yemen and the Houthi rebels there. And when you get into, Saudi Arabia is a Sunni nation. The Daesh, so-called ISIL, are Sunni. The Houthis are Shia. Iran is Shia. When you get back to the Iran deal and support for Saudi Arabia bombing Shia, it's a very mixed can of worms, but the money, the obscene amount of money that we spend either supporting arming or coddling death and destruction are trillions of dollars that we need to take care of, more issues than just home issues. But if you don't have peace at home, if you don't have a society that cares about the middle class, the poor, the dispossessed, how do we define, what is it, the old chestnut, how you define a nation is how they care for the least among them. How we've cared for the least among us, shabbily, to put it very, very mildly.
I think some of this should be put in a temporal context, though. We had been involved very heavily in the Middle East because we had a tremendous thirst for oil.
And still do.
And that now is changing.